This CPU right here, is this even in focus? Yeah. It's the Ryzen 3 3300X. It was launched nearly a year ago as of time of filming with a price tag of just over 100 US dollars, 120 to be exact. And with it came 4 cores, 8 threads, and comparable IPC to that of Intel's Coffee Lake architecture. But it was never really sold as a $120 chip, and that's why I call it the unicorn CPU. Just what happened to the Ryzen 3 3300X? Stay with me. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Fellas, let's be honest, how often do you mow your lawn? And I ain't talking about the one outside. Ladies love groom tech nerds, and it just got a lot easier with the new Lawnmower 3.0. This puppy will go just about anywhere thanks to a waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology. And when you're done, top it off with some crop preserver. It's basically deodorant for your ball sack. Get 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts at Manscaped with code SALAZAR. That's SALAZAR at this link, and you can find it in the video description. Now, for some context, the 3300X at MSRP was an insane bargain. Compared to the Kaby Lake Core i7 7700K that you're seeing here, it cost nearly a third as much for the same core count with multi-threading. And while it didn't boast the same boost frequencies out of the box, the 3300X often traded blows with or even outperformed the 7700K in many workloads, including some games. So no doubt, it was an insane value proposition, one that would surely have caught the eye of the budget gamer. Even the Ryzen 3 3100 at 100 US was a compelling option, though its 2x2 core configuration across 2 CCXs incurred additional latencies that the 3300X didn't suffer with, making it the better buy for certain workloads at a $20 premium. But these prices are pretty much unheard of today. In fact, if you hopped onto eBay in mid-2021, again, when I'm filming this, you'll find that 3300Xs are actually for sale, but for closer to 200 USD rather than 120. And that's a real shame, because it essentially throws the competitive advantage of Ryzen 3 right out the window. These prices bridge awfully close into Ryzen 5 territory, with chips like the 3600 selling for, well, actually about the same price. And with it, you're getting an extra 2 cores and 4 threads. Great for gaming, streaming, and productivity. The Ryzen 5 3600 was the chip of choice in 2020 for anyone looking to stretch their dollar as far as it would go with new hardware, and who wanted a well-rounded experience. I recommended it more than any other CPU last year, and still do actually in 2021 for the right price. But how is a 4-core 8-thread chip built around the same architecture expected to compete at the same price with its 6-core counterpart, albeit with slightly lower frequencies out of the box? Seems like a lost cause, right? But sellers aren't stupid. See, while it may not make sense on paper to charge this much for a 3300X, gaming benchmarks say otherwise. And again, we're looking at this just through a gaming scope here, so productivity and all that aside, numerous reviewers, myself included, found that most games are comfortable with its 8 strong threads, even stock versus stock, and with the cheap box cooler. We're talking a few FPS delta per game at 1080p, where we'd expect CPU usage to matter. And to a gamer's eye, I mean, this is all that needs to be said. The Ryzen 3 3300X is the way better buy at MSRP. So they rushed to retailers in attempts to buy one, only to find out that, well, the chip's pretty much sold out everywhere. And it stayed that way. See, AMD priced this chip so competitively out of the gate with respect to gaming that it pretty much eliminated any sensible chance of obtaining one at MSRP. Economist and scholar Arnold Kling wrote, "If the price is too low, demand will exceed supply, and some consumers will be unable to obtain as much as they would like at that price. We say that supply is rationed." Now, we don't really ration CPUs like we have food and water in the past. These aren't really necessities, thankfully. So instead, we drive up the price to compensate. And that's why so many retailers and eBay listings have 3300Xs priced so much higher than MSRP. These chips looked so good to the average PC builder that they inevitably sold out in seconds. It didn't seem like that was what happened. It just seemed like there was very, very little supply. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're not the quickest to pull the trigger on one of these chips, it might appear like they never existed in the first place. Retailers pick up on these trends and react by raising prices in increments to the point where inventory isn't depleting as quickly as it's filling. This new price becomes the equilibrium for the foreseeable future. Now, there were many at one point who were speculating that AMD was actually limiting the number of 3300Xs in production. Funny enough, it seems so strange though that AMD would hype up a chip as good as this one only to fail to deliver anywhere near the number of units demanded. By doing this, they could drive prices up. Artificial scarcity happens all the time in the diamond industry, right? Diamonds aren't rare. They're naturally occurring minerals that are very frequently found in the Earth's crust and mantle. They're just injected in such small quantities that they're made to appear rare. They just so happen to be some of the strongest minerals on the planet as well. And that's all one needs to do in order to maximize profit when you hold considerable market share in a good or service. But see, here's the thing, AMD isn't the one making the additional profit here. Retailers presumably order these chips in bulk and charge whatever they see fit, whatever they think they can adequately sell these for. MSRP is just that. People get this, they mistake this all the time. Suggested retail price. It's not like they're bound by law to charge that price, right? They can charge whatever they want within reason, and they keep the profits. This, of course, might change over time, but this is probably how it played out shortly after the 3300X was launched. And while you could certainly make the case that AMD is at least partially to blame for this chip's unicorn designation, there's one other variable to consider. Remember the CCX thing? AMD uses 2 core clusters in each chip. That's 4 cores per in the Zen 2 architecture. This was doubled in Zen 3, by the way, with only passable cores activated in whatever SKU applies. And in the 3300X's case, all 4 cores in a single complex must be passable. Now, from a yield standpoint, that's actually pretty tough to pull off. By contrast, in the 3100's case, you can pick and choose the 2 best cores from each CCX to activate. The margins for error here are relatively low, but the 3300X requires that all 4 cores in a single complex be passable. Otherwise, the entire chiplet is either ruined or recycled. You'd have to demote it to either a 3100, which is what they do most of the time, or depending on the opposing CCX's binning, either a 3600 or 3600X. This requirement would be expected to drastically reduce the number of available 3300Xs in circulation, and it may also at least partly explain why it was so difficult to get a hold of one post-launch. This could also partly explain why the price of the 3300X was higher than the 3100 despite both having the same number of cores. And obviously, with a better bin chiplet, you can overclock better, you can hold said clocks for longer, and you don't need as high of a voltage to hold said clocks for longer. In fact, now that I've pondered it a bit longer, if I had to wager today, I'd say the binning aspect of the 3300X was the biggest culprit of them all. Its biggest Achilles heel, if you will. I mean, sure, the chip was incredible for the price, right? It was a third of the price of what Intel was charging for an equivalent chip 3 years ago. But I don't know, its yield requirements were probably just too high to justify it at MSRP, right? The only other notable chips, by the way, requiring fully active core clusters are the Ryzen 7 37 and 3800X, and of course the 3950X. In the 3900X, you could disable 1 core per CCX and still get the necessary 12 cores that you needed. Now, I know this isn't apples to apples. These chips obviously demand higher premiums, but the yield issue still exists. They just weren't demanded by gamers anywhere near as much as the 3300X. Most people don't have thousands of dollars just to shell out on random hardware. In fact, in the case of the 3 just mentioned, if even a single core in either of these clusters doesn't pass the mark, the chiplet cannot be used for this SKU. Those are some pretty demanding tolerances. But perhaps the only saving grace in the 3300X's case is the fact that there's still 1 remaining CCX if the first doesn't pass the mark. If you're a Ryzen 7 CPU, the entire chiplet, that's both CCXs, all 8 cores, must be passable. So even tighter tolerances for Ryzen 7, but of course those chips are usually about 3 times as expensive as the 3300X. Still though, much tighter tolerances here than there would be in the 3100's case, and that perhaps contributed quite a bit to the scarcity of this chip. That in combination with the fact that these chips were in such high demand, and then there's, of course, the elephant in the room, the global health crisis. We can't mention anything about price and availability, it seems, without mentioning that crisis. And yeah, massive shutdowns across the board will impede production. That reduces supply, increases end user prices. It certainly didn't help our little unicorn here. So the 3300X, though a phenomenal chip on paper, doesn't leave much of a dent in the industry. It just never had the presence and impact that a chip like this needs to have in order to be remembered in such a way. Instead, it remains a fable, one very few will be able to enjoy at MSRP when it truly becomes a unicorn. As for the current going rate, It really makes no sense in my view to spend the same amount of money on a 4-core chip that you would on a 6-core counterpart. Regardless of the minor variance we see in some of these charts, the 3600 is far better prepared to handle simultaneous workloads, streaming, content creation, encoding, any set of background processes. The 3600 is undeniably the better chip for all of that. And it doesn't make any sense to shut these possibilities down on the back of a unicorn. At MSRP? Okay, absolutely. It was, and probably still is, one of the best value gaming CPUs on the market at MSRP. But at nearly $200, it's no longer a unicorn. It's just meh. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. I feel really weird having like this super small CPU as like the only showpiece for this video. That's why I've been holding it a lot. But I'll be linking a few CPUs tested down below in the video descriptions. Be sure to check those out. If you are in the market, consider subscribing. If you have not already, leave a like, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.